Hi, and welcome to this episode of the HR and CQ show. Today, we're going to be talking about Emiratisation. And so we decided to bring in a guest, Shazia Bharuchi, and she is a career development coach and recently been doing a lot of career development coaching with Emiratis who are moving into the private sector and perhaps are having to navigate a private work sector that is predominantly of another culture, maybe of a Western culture. Shazia herself is actually British, but she's hijabi. And so we thought that she would be a good mix of cultures in terms of understanding the kind of perception of Westerners, whilst also at the same time understanding, how it might feel as an Emirati going into a space as a hijabi, looking quite different to the other people within the organisation and within the office. So before we come to Shazia, I thought it would be helpful to move to Sarah and ask her to give us a bit of an overview on what Emiratisation is, because I'm mindful that there might be people that are in HR roles, new to the role, maybe even new to the region, and don't fully understand what Emiratisation is. So Sarah, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell? Okay. So Emiratisation targets were set for the private sector, and that being any company that is trade licensed under the Ministry of Human Resources, so what would be classified as a mainland company or LLC. At the moment, they're not as far reaching to the free zones. And then within those companies, there's two structures. You've got companies that have between 20 and 49 employees, and then companies that have 50 plus employees. So companies that are 20 to 49 employees must have one Emirati on board by the end of this year and another one next year, which will equate to roughly about 10% of headcount, very roughly. And this is a new target that's been put in place. And then companies that are over 50, it gets marginally more complicated because it's for every 50 headcount unskilled, and it's unskilled by job title on visa classification, it's one Emirati per 50. So if you've got 300 people, it's 6 Emiratis at that level if it's 300 unskilled. If you've got skilled workers by classification, then it is up to 10% by next year. So the target has been increasing on an annual basis, and this year the target is 8%. So it is split through the year as well. There is a mid-year target and then an end-of-year target. We've just passed the mid-year target, which was at the 30th of June. So hopefully everybody's complied with that. Otherwise, it's very expensive. And if not, then you've got to achieve it by the end of this year. Otherwise, it's going to be even more expensive because you will have a massive bill attached to your labour file as of January next year for all of the months that you didn't achieve the target. And it's, if I remember correctly, it's like 8 or 9,000 dirhams per Emirati you didn't achieve in your business every month. Okay, so it's in your interest to make sure you achieve the targets. So that is Emiratisation in a nutshell.
Thanks.
And it is a massive challenge.
Exactly. And so Shazia is perhaps hearing some of those challenges, not in terms of meeting the quota, but perhaps in terms of the challenges that Emiratis are facing when they first join an organisation that perhaps predominantly isn't Emirati and, is made up of lots of other cultures, maybe predominantly a Western culture. So perhaps you can... Well, first of all, welcome, Shazia. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And so, the first question I suppose I want to pose to you is, what are some of the challenges that you're hearing Emiratis are facing when they come to you with their for coaching?
I think professionally, they feel a little bit caught between the public sector mindset and the private sector expectations.
Right.
And they're so used to hierarchical structures in public sector. So when they come into private sector, they're a little bit miffed and it feels quite alien to them. And I think that, they're thrown into flat teams with informal norms that are not always explained. So I think the strategies around that is to sort of guide them. We talk about self-assessment and reflection of, potentially the meetings they've had with the employers during the hiring, what's been said, what's in the contract, understanding the norms, how the hierarchy works in the multicultural organizations. There's a bit of a lack of awareness about how this is going to be different to the expectations they've set and that are set by companies. So it's trying to align their understanding and these new expectations quite early on. So they struggle a lot with that.
Because there's a lot of change that's happened with, Emiratisation is not something that's new. The targets are new, right? Emiratisation was in the previous legislation, but it wasn't strictly enforced, and that's why they've now reinforced this, that it needs to happen. And what companies have tended to do in the past is invent a position to accommodate having an Emirati on board because they have to, not because they see that person as an integral part of the team. Personally, I understand the approach, but I think it's the wrong approach. What has your experience been of those two sort of scenarios and setups in real life?
I think it puts both at a disadvantage because, a lot of companies are hiring because of a quota, a number, and without realizing who's coming into the organization and how we're going to integrate them effectively. And then there's judgments based on their lack of, participation or engagement as to, they're really disengaged, they don't want to take part. So it's sort of, having a bit more clarity about, okay, we are going to bring on this talent. What sort of allowances or preparation do we need to make to allow them to successfully integrate, to be, active members of the team, but also allow the support systems for these local talents coming in to have a safe space to communicate and also understand what the norms are and how things work in the organization. So, yeah, that's my experience. It impacts both.
So, with that in mind, then, what do you think? What are some of the gaps that you see in how most companies are currently onboarding Emiratis? And maybe you can give us a bit of detail about what would good look like, I suppose.
I think there's a lack of tailored onboarding programs, and I think Sarah probably can give you a bit more insight, but often we forget about the local context. I've seen onboarding slides with, English, of global brands, with aesthetics, but there is absolutely no Arabic translations. Now, we have to remember that English is not a first language for a lot of the talent coming through. It's a second language. So how about we try to help them and support them? So, maybe customize some of the onboarding content, some Arabic glossaries, some videos from Arabic voices. It just feels more integrated and, more around having them feel comfortable that this is okay. I'm going into a company, but they value who I am and where I come from.
And it's quite funny because we've just finished recording, but for future episodes where we're talking about integrating non-Emiratis into teams and having onboarding documents and the importance of ensuring the cultural awareness. And this is essentially the same in reverse. And I'm half smiling because, part of the onboarding documents that I put together includes some basic phrases in Arabic and words in Arabic, but they're phonetically written in English. They're not written in Arabic.
Exactly.
Not that I expect somebody to read it, but in Arabic. But, it's something that you just forget to do. And it is
for the locals,
Yeah. And, it is something that we kind of take for granted that people read and speak and understand English. And we tend to forget from an HR perspective that actually under the law we have an obligation to make sure that our employees understand the rules and the regulations of the company and the expectations, and that it needs to be in a language that they get. And if we don't do that, then we're failing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we usually do it for expats, but do we do it for the locals? And again, that's where the gap is in the integration, right? Because our mindset is we've got to make sure that the expats coming in from different countries understand fully what the laws are, but what about the local talents? And now with the Emiratisation targets increasing, there's going to be more and more. So companies do need to start really thinking about it a bit more actively than before.
Yeah, no, this is very true. So thinking about that, I've worked with clients where we've brought in Emiratis to work with us to comply with the quotas, but we have actually given them roles. and made them feel part of the corporate environment and the corporate structure. And I put my hand up. We didn't have this consideration at the time, and moving forwards, I will have this consideration. So it's all, this is where we're never too old to learn. But some of the points that have come up in that, we've got very different. We've got very different personalities that are coming in with different levels of expertise and experience and things. And we kind of have an expectation, as we do with other cultures, that they're all going to behave the same way. And when we've got one individual that's behaving this way and one individual that's behaving this way, like what are some of the different behavioural, I wouldn't say norms, but like cultural behavioural norms that we could expect and anticipate and then learn to accommodate from bringing Emiratis into the business?
I think Emiratis, but also culturally becoming aware of what are the norms. I mean, the biggest thing for Emiratis is respect. Having a respect for themselves, but a respectful environment to work in, and also it takes them time to build relationships and respect their colleagues around them. So I think a more self-awareness around what their cultural norms are and potentially what their barriers might be. So talking to them more and asking them, what are the things that would really make you feel comfortable and integrated into the team? What are the things that you struggle with? These sort of open questions, because like you said, everybody's different. You might have, I find typically some of the male Emiratis are a little bit more outgoing. They'll actually project, they'll tell you how they're feeling, what they want, whereas maybe some of the ladies are a little bit more quieter, on the quiet side, a bit reluctant to say things. So again, excuse me, the cultural awareness that there might be a difference. Somebody might not be as outgoing, and this, I think, a strategy to overcome that is when we take on these talents is to create maybe a buddy system where we pair them with we pair the Emirati hires with a mentor who's aware of the cultural norms within the organization, and not only in the first month do they learn the processes, but learn the cultural signals of how the actual company works, and also learn how to confidently navigate, being a bit more assertive, giving their opinion, having a safe space to say, actually, this is against how I operate, and how could we collaborate to make it more comfortable? And, just understanding how authority flows in organizations. So, a bit of a mentorship program where somebody who's been in there and who understands, like myself, being a Muslim, a hijabi, but also coming from a Western environment, to actually support them to look at their viewpoint, but also how to integrate within, a multicultural environment.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, Sarah, in terms of you might have one Emirati that is more progressive in their values and another that's more traditional. You might have somebody that's been educated in the West, for example, or you might have somebody that was educated locally, and that can have a great impact on, as in a big impact on what their cultural values are and what they might be okay with in the workplace and what perhaps they're not. And a couple of examples I was thinking of that was, I remember speaking to somebody who wasn't an Emirati national, but they were of a different nationality, and they said they'd gone to work in a predominantly UK dominant culture, and they couldn't get over how much British people take the mick out of each other, and we in the UK we call it banter, and how much we banter with each other. And this person was like, I really find it offensive that people keep making fun of each other the whole time. It's really tough for me to get used to, because that's not something we do in my culture. And then I was thinking about, in terms of Emirati culture, that whole concept of saving face. It's important that we respect the way I'm perceived by others. Maybe banter is just saying that Emiratis don't have a sense of humor, but the way that they do humor perhaps looks very different to, if they were walking into an office that was predominantly UK centric. And so just having those sort of things in mind. But one of the things that you do is obviously coach Emiratis to help them with their career development. And I was thinking, there's times where you've had people that are technically competent, but they're not seeing any progression in their career. And so they come to you for guidance and support on what does that look like. But what do you think is perhaps maybe causing some of that lack of progression?
I think technically capable Emiratis sometimes don't necessarily progress because they're not seen. They sort of, again, this is going back to something we mentioned about bringing hires in because of a quota. They're brought in for a quota, and sometimes they're left out of projects and, other sponsorship networks. And, often when they come to me, we sort of speak about and encourage them to think about building their relations, but also requesting visibility, being a little bit more assertive in volunteering for cross-functional collaboration projects and speaking out a little bit more. Because again, the danger of this is there's some very, very capable individuals sitting there not progressing and not showcasing their full capabilities.
Yeah, and that you lose them from the business. You work so hard to bring them in. And,
yes.
There are companies who will find Emirati talent by luck and by chance and connections and things like this, and because they have a good online presence. And then others who will utilise companies to source them for them. And pay
X amount,
X amount of commission to do that, and it is such a waste of opportunity and a waste of money to bring somebody in who's brilliant and
lose them
exactly, not use them, and then that person gets despondent and goes, well, sod this for a game of chess, not quite that terminology, and then moves on to another company and things. And I think there's talking to a lot of Emiratis and sort of working with them. They want to contribute to companies.
Yes,
they really
do.
The younger generations that are coming through now really want to get involved and really want to go, oh, look, this is what I can do, and this is, and have a voice in the business and contribute and give something back to the business. It's not just about getting an extra 500 dirhams somewhere anymore. And I think that's what a lot of companies fail to recognise.
Yeah, they're missing a trick.
Yeah,
they are missing, because you've got this talent and you're not utilising it and I think it comes back to lack of cultural understanding, the cultural intelligence again. And I think that's why your book is great, because it gives us that understanding that actually we can work together cohesively and we can collaborate. We just need to understand each other a little bit more and take that time. Let's just commit a little bit of time to understand our workforce, and then we can better integrate them and get a lot better efficiency out of them. Because these individuals, they want to contribute. And I agree, absolutely.
Yep, they do.
And you were talking there about creating opportunities for Emiratis. I think we would all agree that Dubai is a very relationship orientated culture, but if you've got a organization that's perhaps predominantly Western in its culture, those opportunities to connect probably look quite different to perhaps what an Emirati would like to be involved with. And just to kind of elaborate on what I'm suggesting here, I'm saying that often in a Western dominated culture, the night out or the way that we network is, we all go to the bar that we've all agreed to and we all go for a drink. Emiratis aren't going to typically want to be involved in that kind of opportunity to connect and network if it involves alcohol.
Yes.
And so I think it's important that organizations start to think about how can you diversify your kind of networking opportunities for your team, because it might be perceived, the Emirati person never wants to get involved. They don't want to come to any of our things. Yeah. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just that what you have on offer for them is not what's appealing to them or culturally appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think the unconscious bias shows up when, these Emirati professionals, they sort of remain quiet in these situations, or even within like brainstorming sessions, they're labeled as disengaged. They don't want to make an effort to integrate. But are we offering them the right opportunity to integrate where they're comfortable? Even for myself as a hijabi, if there's an event and there's going to be alcohol involved, I'll think twice. It's not to say I'm going to go and have the alcohol, but it's not a comfortable setting. It's against my culture and belief. So I'll think twice about going.
Yeah, so it's not like you're going to say, oh yeah, I'll just not drink. It's actually, you don't want to be in that environment surrounded by people that are drinking as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think this can manifest a lot also within the work environment, because when, if we don't fully understand, them a bit more deeper, and we could just label them as disengaged, they're not interested, they're not committed. And the danger is that, again, we lose them. They lack then opportunity, integration, there's judgments about them, and we fail to recognize their competencies, right, and their capabilities. And then again, we're not using a great resource that we've got to the full capacity. And it's, I think it goes on both sides with the Emirati talents. We need to support them to have a bit more assertive participation, but also the managers to understand that, what the sort of cultural norms are to help them participate as well.
I think one of the things that we've spoken about recently that you gave as an example is where it's to recognize the differences between individuals, but to make sure they've got psychological safety to be able to open up.
The safe space.
If that is as simple as saying, okay, let's, you've got a group of people, and recognizing that maybe an Emirati female, because of their familial culture, not just the Emirati culture or the Islamic culture, but the familial culture as well, and behaviors, they're not encouraged to speak up. So maybe taking them out in public, so maybe taking them to the side, or having a simple conversation one-to-one, just to say, hey, what's your opinion on this one? I really want to hear from you. Immediately gives respect, gives value. You're going to get that buy-in straight away.
Absolutely. And it's, again, having that awareness that maybe within a team setting, somebody might not speak up, but that doesn't mean they don't want to. Maybe change the setting and be a bit more adaptive and ask them on a one-to-one basis. Maybe they're not familiar in if the manager is male, and asking for opinions and putting the limelight on them, that's not comfortable, and that's okay. So if you notice that, be aware and have that intelligence to later on to approach and say, I'd really love your opinion too. What do you think?
I think also things like being over friendly. I think also in terms of being a female Emirati, there would be certain boundaries that you would expect your colleagues to put in place in terms of the way that they
behave.
Well, I was thinking just more the way that they even greet you.
Yes.
I know, like in the UK, for example, in the office environment, it might be culturally appropriate to give a male a hug if you see them.
Or shake hands.
Or shake hands even. But that isn't something that, or even just a nudge, like if you're making a point, you might give them a nudge and say, what do you think of that? All of those things, we need to be kind of just mindful of personal space and boundaries as well.
I think it's something that, it's very Emirati. It's something we need to think about in this context, but generally speaking, in the UK, in the West, and I'd say the West, America, Australia, UK, there's so much legislation around sexual harassment. So everybody should be mindful of this, that you shouldn't be able to do it anywhere, anyways, right? Because somebody will even with the best intentions, could be taken the wrong way. But especially with
local
Emiratis or with Islamic women, and or men for that matter, there is a whole nother sort of level of respect that needs to be at place.
Absolutely. I have had personal experiences of this, being a woman of hijabi, and the most uncomfortable thing is when somebody sees, obviously you identify as a hijabi because you can see I'm wearing one, and in a network setting they put their hand out to shake your hand, and you're sort of in two minds to think, it would look really extremely rude if I don't, but this goes against my values. And sometimes I've just had to, because I thought this is going to be so rude, and other times I've sort of thought, where shall I place my hand to avoid doing that?
But what would you, we've only got a few minutes left, but what would you, in such situations, again, because we're looking at this from like companies bringing in Emiratis, but if you're an Emirati and you're an Emirati female, a hijabi lady, who is presented with a handshake, how do you respectfully say, no, I don't want to shake your hand?
Just say no.
I sort of, usually if I'm presented with that, if an Emirati lady, I would encourage them to embrace who they are and not get pressured to do something they're not comfortable with, to say, nice to meet you. I usually put my hand on my chest, or sort of put my hand behind and say, nice to meet you, nod of the head, something else just to acknowledge that. And a lot of the time it's the other person who realizes, oops, maybe I shouldn't have put that hand out, without fearing that you're being rude. Just, embrace who you are, continue being you without apology. No,
it's not something you should apologize for at all, for not shaking. And It's that comes down to the company not giving, the employer of that individual not giving them the right culture and intelligence training when they arrive.
Exactly.
So it's our fault.
I also think it's interesting when you see somebody that's perhaps not so familiar with the culture here. And so, for example, Shazia and I know each other well. And because of that, when I greet her, I will give her a hug.
Yeah.
But when you see somebody that's not perhaps so familiar with the culture and they've had this explanation of you shouldn't greet Emiratis in a certain way. And I'm like, they look at like they're like a rabbit in headlights going, oh, they're cuddling they're giving each other a hug. And I'm like, yes, she's a female, I'm a female. We know each other. That's okay. It's when it's of opposite genders where it's perhaps more
but then
a problem.
I come on to and this is the last, because we could be talking about this for ages, but I recently went on vacation to Oman, and I have friends in Oman. I was in the middle of Nizwa animal market at like 7:00 in the morning, taking photos of, doing the tourist thing, because and all of a sudden I see somebody I know, random. He is Omani, he lives in Oman. I saw somebody I knew across the market, and I was like, so I went dashing off to go and say hi to him. He's Omani. He was wearing traditional Omani dress, and I'm obviously Western, not hijabi, and I had, 3/4 length shorts on and a t-shirt, but still respectfully dressed, I wasn't in a bikini or anything like this, not that I would be anywhere anyways. And the response I got from him was, and I was like, and even I was taken aback because it just went out, not because I didn't feel comfortable with his response, but it's like, okay, that's not necessarily culturally, like, okay, you're going with this, that's fine. And I literally had like that split second to just, okay, fine,
react.
Right? Because he embraced me, like literally threw his arms up, massive hug in the middle of all of this, that there's all these Omani women and guys and, around. What the hell? Like, it's fine. We've known each other for years. It's not a problem. But just in the most, and it's like, that could have been really culturally insensitive. If I'd done it to him, I let him lead. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll go with whatever, if it was a shake of the hands or just a hi or, But no, it was a full-on thing. So funny. But just complete opposite. On that note, we have run out of time.
Can we just round off with...
Yeah. Go on.
So, Shazia, what about if you are kind of a small to medium-sized business and you're in the private sector and you recognise that your predominant culture is of another, and so, bringing on board Emiratis is going to be a new thing for you. Like, how can they prepare? Can you just give us some kind of quick fire, you should do this, you can do this, blah, blah, blah?
I think expat-led SMEs could, hold pre-hiring like cultural cafes with short explanations with maybe Emirati experts to discuss local norms, expectations around holidays, hierarchy. It's a light touch, but it's impactful. Just building that awareness around how, the company works, how things might be different to their understanding, and also what are their expectations to get out there, how they work, but what are the expectations of these hires coming in?
Would it be something that you could ask them, the Emirati nationals, how do you like to be greeted? Are you happy to shake someone's hand, so that you could then share that with the team?
Absolutely. And this is the thing, we don't ask.
No, we don't.
We do not ask. We just assume assumptions and judgments, biggest things that create toxic work environments, because we just go, because it was because of this, without understanding.
We really, really, really could talk about this for a lot longer, and maybe we will in another episode, who knows.
Thank you.
But for the moment, we're going to wrap up. So Shazia, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
And her details, if you do want to
absolutely
utilise her for career development coaching, will be in the podcast description.
Yes, they will. And obviously you can find her on LinkedIn, and we'll post it everywhere there as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to seeing you again soon, but also everyone else on the next episode.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks.